Like, because when I think about a song like Reagan, for instance, right? I'm born in 1980 to fucking black parents that were part of the struggle and shit. And so, like, I felt like I was the kind of person who had this advanced, understanding of the evils of a Reagan before like mainstream America did. But
Yeah.
still, I found it fucking shocking when I heard the song. Because as much as I knew that to be the case, I never like thought about a rapper just standing on that for a whole song.
Yeah.
And then like ended it on.
I leave you with 4 words. I'm glad Reagan dead.
For that line, I'm glad Reagan's dead. I'm taking credit for that because.
Oh, okay.
Michael, I hate that I'm even saying this, but I'm only taking partial credit for it. But because we were talking about that, we were doing that song, and do you remember when KRS-One did? Oh yeah, that's what you say when you see a double down. Oh yeah, it's crazy. KRS-One joined super hard. At the end of it, he was like, you know what? I'm kind of glad Nixon died. And we were, and I've showed him that shit, reminded him of that shit when we were making this jam. And he was like, I was like, yo, this shit reminds me of this. I was like, you should say something similar to this. Anyway, that's how that, I'm glad Reagan's dead. It went from, I'm kind of glad to, that's the brilliance of Killer Mike. You know what I mean? He's like, we're cutting out all of the nice things here. I'm legitimately glad this person died. It was an education to me too. Just not that I didn't know the Reagan era was fucked, but it's when I realized that song is when I realized that Mike had a ability to break shit down historically and relate it to what it means for people and what it has meant for people on a street level and on a real level. That's when I realized that he really had that. It's amazing to see someone who has that political understanding. I mean, Mike has read a lot, obviously, and looked into and studied and been really aware of history and politics. It's not this impenetrable, just here's a bunch of shit that happened. He's putting himself in it. He's putting himself getting beat up by cops, and it's like, and a man tying his experience just being like a young black child in the 80s to a fucking an arms deal and making it all make sense. Some fucking brilliant shit. And the music had to match. It had to feel as sort of ominous and epic. Then I was doing research and I found that the Reagan quote, because when Mike started talking about Iran-Contra, and I started to go back and remind myself, because I remembered it from the first time when I was a kid. I had to go back and like look at the history and shit, because I didn't remember when Reagan had been like, well, I still don't believe it, but they say, apparently it's not something you can just lie about. It's funny when you think about that now. Like, motherfuckers would never just admit to the truth now. Like back then, Reagan was like, no, it didn't happen. And they were like, sure. They like whispered in it, sir, everyone knows it happened. He was just like, all right. So, hey, I don't remember it, but I guess apparently it happened. I had found that whole quote online. I found that clip and threw it in there, but it's a crazy record.
I guess I wonder too, and like I said, these are the type of questions I already know what the answer is going to be, but I feel compelled to ask them.
You don't know, man. I could say some crazy shit. I could just be like,
you could,
yeah. I could just say some insulting shit, just make fun of you.
I'm with it. I'm here for it. Yeah. Like, I just wonder, man, has he ever said anything on a record and that you were kind of like a little worried about?
Fuck yeah. Of course. Of course. First of all, everyone should know that there's definitely versions of Run the Jewels songs where he just, like, the first time he went in, it was on some, like, everyone in the room was like, okay. Everyone in the room was like, that was a little hardcore, man. You know what I mean? Like, Mike said something really amazing. One time, there was some shit that I had said, and I forget what it was, and I was like, "Damn, that's pretty fucking real. Like maybe that's a little too fucking real." And I was gonna change it, and Mike was like, "Man, because you have to understand, I come from a world in hip hop music. My whole career, 90% of my career took place where wasn't that many people listening. It was a good amount of people.
Right.
I had a career and a fan base, but you could get away with saying a lot of fucking shit, and it wasn't mainstream at all. And so Run the Jewels started to pop off, and it was like people are listening, and it was either that I said some shit, or he said some crazy shit, and we were arguing about it. We were talking about it like, you don't want to say that. And I forget what it was. And he was like, man, we need to have real edge, not just fake edge. And I was like, you know what? You're right. I agree. And that was that. To me, the second that I decided I was going to stand next to this man and open my mouth was the second that I decided that I had to let this dude be him. I back this dude. I'm not him. I don't say everything he says, nor do I think the way that he thinks about everything, but that doesn't matter. I still back him as a fucking person. So he ends up deciding what he puts out there. And sometimes what he puts out there is, I don't know, dangerous. You know, sometimes he puts
danger.
Sometimes it's dangerous. Yeah. If you're ever worried, it's more like just that little voice in the back of your head where you're like, true speakers don't always have the easiest time. You know?
Yeah, because it's not, even when I say worried, I don't necessarily mean like, oh, people are not going to like this.
No, I never think of it like that.
Right. I mean, either. What I'm more thinking about is like, you could be concerned for his safety.
Yeah, and I'm standing right next to him.
Exactly. 100%.
But shit, man. Whatever. We're just rappers, man. Like at the end of the fucking day. But yeah, no, I mean, Mike is like that's one of the reasons why I'm in a group with Mike. It's powerful to hear people say some of the shit that he says, period. Right. For anybody. He became my favorite rapper for that very reason.
In that same, in one of the interviews I saw, I believe y'all were talking about Untitled, and you said that like he had freestyled his verse, and you were just sitting there with your mind blown.
Yeah.
When you say freestyle, like he's coming off the head.
Elegance in the form of a black elephant, smoking white wine, no on terraces. Will I die slain like my king by a terrorist? Will my woman be Coretta, take my name and cherish it? Or will she
what I mean is that Mike doesn't sit right. And when he does, I guess he did a lot before, but I think sometimes he just feels it. And so when he got with me, I've barely ever seen him sit right. But he told me that was because of your beats. But so I get the feeling that it was one of those things where sometimes he would sit in right, but most of the time, if he was really stoned and feeling a beat, he would just pace around and think of lines in his head, lay the line down, go back, listen again, and try and lay it in the tag. So he did this building on thing, but he wasn't sitting there writing or anything. And he was doing that every time we were in the studio. And I was like, in my mind, he never wrote. I've since seen him write, which basically just means he's not really feeling the beat as much as he should be. And
that's the metric.
Mike, when he's in that zone, it's just magic. When he hits it, when it all unfolds and it works, and it's just magic. Yeah,
I love hearing that. I love hearing that because I think that you hear him stepping inside a zone on this album. You hear it. You know what I'm saying? You hear him like fucking. It sounds like sometimes he's even surprising himself. You know what I'm saying? With some of the shit that he's coming up with and saying, and the energy of that is so fucking live. And hearing that, like, even though that wasn't what was spoken of at the time, like you can hear so much potential in the future of the sound of him going in on your production.
Yeah. I think it cracked something open. I think me doing the music and the way that we did it was, like we said, it was like a little bit of a fresh start from Mike, for sure. And for me too. That shit, and then followed by Cancer for Cure like a week later, was sort of a rebirth for me, in my career. After coming out of this dark period and really having, not really had anything. And all of a sudden I was in a situation where I was dropping these 2 records a week apart from each other. It was the beginning of a new epoch in my life. It wasn't planned. I didn't even know that Mike's record was coming out a week before my record. Run the Jewels has been like an exercise in like weird synchronicity since we met, to the point where you could almost feel it working nothing really can surprise us that much anymore. It's just kind of like, oh, word, you're putting a record out and the whole world's going to shut down.
Right.
Of course,
right.
we'll run the jewels. You start to get to the point where you're like narcissistic about it, like we control the world with our weird magic. But yeah, man. So I look at that record as one of my favorite things that I've produced front to back, for sure.
A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not.
The end of the Reagan era, I'm like Lemma 12, old enough to understand the shit had changed forever. They declared the war on drugs, like a war on terror, but what it really did was let the police terrorize whoever.